Hello and welcome. The last time I talked about Pokemon, I talked about my experience with Pokemon's Blue and Silver. While those games will always hold a special place in my heart, for me, the Pokemon series only really started getting good on the Game Boy Advance. So join me as I take a look back at my experience with the third generation of Pokemon games. But before that, today's video is brought to you by us and the 16-bit store. Our display stands are designed to fit their games and systems perfectly, and I love using them to show off my Pokemon games and my Game Boy systems. If you want some, why not check them out today at 16bitstore.com or in the link in this video's description. While my introduction to Pokemon on the Game Boy Advance was with Pokemon Pinball Advance, even at the time I did consider this to be a bit of a side game. No, I didn't get to play my first real Pokemon game on the Game Boy Advance until sometime in the early 2000s when my old friend Daniel let me borrow his copy of Pokemon Sapphire for the summer. I've long since forgotten why he even let me borrow it, but I was and still am extremely appreciative. Starting up Sapphire has always hit me with a jolt of excitement, which I now see as nostalgic. Yeah, the intro isn't anything to write home about, but I just love this improved atmosphere this game creates. The music, the improved aesthetics, really just shows just how restricted Pokemon was on the original Game Boy. And this theme of Pokemon games without limitations is easy to see in just the opening alone. There's a strong narrative here and cool things happen, like you have a dad and he's a gym leader. There's little cutscenes like the local Pokemon professor getting attacked and the characters feeling a lot more fleshed out, like your rival having just a fun personality who's there more to help their dad and to be friends with Pokemon and maybe be a budding researcher rather than just being the best trainer of all and trying to be better than you like every other game. I love the atmosphere that this game creates, and it even makes my choice of starter different from all the other games. At this point in time, when I've been playing Pokemon long enough that I just ended up choosing the water starter, since it can learn ice moves and Gary's little Bulbasaur just gets destroyed because I can ice beam it in the face. Over the years, I've done so many playthroughs with this game that I've ended up loving all three of Hoenn's starters. I remember that my first starter, though, was Torchic, since that's the one that Daniel used, and I love its third evolution. But Trico also has this really cool design, and Mudkip is always going to be my favorite, especially being a water-ground combo. But Hoenn does start showing his ages in a few weird places. The game is technically the first one with double battles, but outside of the Psychic Twins, I often forgot that it was here since it's so hidden. It's almost as if Game Freak wasn't entirely convinced that double battles was going to be received positively. Another aging issue here is coming from a future Pokemon game. The physical special split only came in Gen 4, so moves don't hit as hard as I would expect them to, especially moves like Earthquake. These are minor niggles though, especially for what is a 20-plus-year-old game. Pokemon Sapphire has this excellent balance of a good mix of battles, gyms, exploration, story, and new Pokemon to discover around every corner. Yeah, there still isn't enough trainer battles to raise a full team of Pokemon by the time you hit the Elite Four, but the way battles are handled here is masterful. Even the act of rebattling a gym or your rival is always a treat. I also love this game's story. Team Magma and Aqua aren't just your traditional baddies whose misdeeds happen off screen and you're told about them after they've happened. You see them being jerks to everyone and everything, making their inevitable beatdown that much more satisfying, even if the story only really makes sense in Sapphire. Like, why is Groundon in the ocean? Why isn't he in the inevitable volcano that this region has? Hoenn is just such a cool region to explore with so much diversity, unique towns and villages, places to visit, and the best feature of any or every game, secret bases that you can call your own and copy over to your friends' bases and challenge them with. The world has all these nooks and crannies that I've spent years just discovering and exploring this game and learning all of the secrets. Even now, I'm still learning more, like actually solving the Braille challenge on my own. While future Pokemon games are certainly more polished than Ruby and Sapphire are, I really can't recommend these games enough. I loved them so much that at the end of the summer when Daniel asked me for his game back, for an entire day I tried my best not to give it back and keep it for myself. But eventually I remembered the sage and trainer advice of not stealing Pokemon, and I did eventually give the game back before I went home that day. I do kind of feel like a jerk about doing this to Daniel, and eventually, many years later, I did buy myself my own copy. While I loved Pokemon Sapphire, when I did give it back, I was without a Pokemon GBA game again, and I wouldn't get one until a long while later when my local Professor Oak came up to me on what I think was my birthday and asked me what my favorite Pokemon was. Bulbasaur or Charmander. When I answered with Bulbasaur, since Squirtle wasn't an option, she then proceeded to give me a box copy of Pokemon Leaf Green. Now, I knew next to nothing about Leaf Green when she gave it to me, but based off of the Pokemon on the box and the real Professor Oak welcoming me to the world of Pokemon, I was pretty sure that this was just a remake of Pokemon's Red and Blue, the first remake that Game Freak made, and boy, can I tell! On the one hand, this game is a one-to-one remake of the Game Boy original, from the layout of the map to the dialogue used. On the other hand, it does have a ton of modern amenities that can be found in modern Pokemon games, from tutorials and basic features like running. The issue was, at this point, Game Freak hadn't found a good balance between preserving the original experience and not frustrating the player. For example, to keep to the original, the game only lets you have access to the first 151 Pokemon, which is really cool. But you can't unlock the rest of them until after you beat the game and unlock the National Dex, which is fair enough. But for some reason, Game Freak decided if you have a Pokemon with a post-Gen 1 evolution, like for example Golbat, and you meet the requirements to evolve it, Golbat will refuse to evolve until Professor Oak says so. On the other side of this lunacy, trading with Ruby and Sapphire is locked off until you get the National Dex, which kinda sucks. But the event to unlock trading is such a fun sequence that it's honestly a highlight for me during my recent playthrough. This juxtaposition is all throughout the game, and I feel that the main game kind of feels held back because of it. It feels like Game Freak really wanted to spoon feed new trainers with all the tutorials and hand-holding which weren't in the original game. It really slows down the whole experience. These gameplay decisions honestly made replaying Leaf Green just a bit harder than I was expecting. And this was probably the main subconscious reasons why I never replayed Leaf Green until now. But I am happy I did replay them since I forgot just how much fun the Sevi Isles are. The Sevi Isles are 7 new playable islands with the level design and focus of Pokemon's Ruby and Sapphire, all without the need to have the story and 8 gyms woven and shoehorned into it. With secrets around every corner and a small plot around the remnants of Team Rocket, and so much just hidden and new content that it probably could have been the basis for its own Pokemon game, rather than being tacked on at the end of what was Blue. While I don't feel that Leaf Green is as good as Ruby and Sapphire, it's not that bad of a game. And if you are given the opportunity to play this or Blue, Leaf Green is a much better experience. And eventually, when the next generation of Pokemon games came out, you were able to bring your friends along with you. But as this was the only Game Boy Advance Pokemon at this time, I overplayed the crap out of it. I battled, I traded with friends, and I did almost everything I could in this game, including completing the Kanto decks. However, I missed Hoenn so much, and I really wanted to go back, and I was desperately looking for a copy of Ruby and Sapphire at every opportunity. But I genuinely couldn't find it anywhere, and soon I actually got myself a Nintendo DS, waiting until the next Pokemon game would come out for it. I remember my local Professor Oak was even so desperate to play the new Pokemon game that they ended up getting Troze, thinking that it was it, and warned us newbies not to be fooled. So I continued waiting, and as the fortunes would have it, while I was looking at the last remnants of the Game Boy Advance games and my local Toys R Us one day, I saw a familiar face looking back at me. In between the late generation GBA shovelware, there was Rayquaza on the box of a Pokemon game called Emerald. A quick glance at the back showed me that this was another version of Ruby and Sapphire I just wasn't made aware of. But there was a Viper building, and I had this cool green band on my hair. I was instantly sold and begged my mom to get the game for me, and soon I was playing what I do consider to be the best Pokemon game that I own. Starting this game up again after so long felt like coming back home. Sure, there was minor changes here and new characters there, but all of the beats were the same, right up until the contest hall, which were no longer contest halls. The gyms had new lineups, and my old tricks didn't work like they used to. Even the trick house was redesigned. And the random trainer battles could turn into a double battle if you happened to catch the wrong line of sight. In fact, there was so much double battles here, it was insane, considering how hidden they were back in the original games. The changes aren't just minor too. The story was also improved. Team Magma's story was finally given the justice that it deserves, and now they had an underground volcano layer with Groundon in that volcano. And the resolution is resolved by Rayquaza. And the best part is, when you are done with the game, you have the Battle Fronteer to look forward to. Even contests were made easier, with all of them happening in Lily Cove City, rather than jumping from city to city like in Ruby and Sapphire. Emerald took everything that I loved with Sapphire and just made it better. It fixed most of my issues and gave me more of what I wanted. It's just a shame that in the real world, this is almost impossible to get, thanks to its insane prices. And it is thanks to the modern Pokemon game pricing that makes recommending any of these titles very difficult. None of the Pokemon games were ever been re-released on another platform as they are, and as a result their prices have hyper-inflated to such an insane degree that my advice is to save that money that you were going to spend on one of them and spend it instead on a flashcard and find the game online for free. Yeah, piracy is illegal and I can't condone it. But even then, it's not like Game Freak, the Pokemon Company, or Nintendo will ever see a dime of the money that you are planning on spending on these scalped games. There was once a time where you could give Nintendo your money for Pokemon's Ruby and Sapphire, since they were remade on the 3DS. Not as well as Game Freak has remade a game before, but it's a downside better to whatever the heck happened to Pokemon's Diamond and Pearl on the Switch. But if you really want to go through the Sevi Isles with Leaf Green or Fire Red, then you are genuinely stuck with the Game Boy Advance games, which is genuinely a shame too, since all these games are honestly highlights of the series in my books, and games which I feel that any Pokemon trader should have in their collections. I mean, they lasted us 6 years between the original release of Ruby and Sapphire and the eventual release of Pokemon's Diamond and Pearl, which I will be discussing in the next video. So until then, thank you ever so much for listening. I hope you have yourself a good day, and as always, take care.